Good morning, everybody. My name is Ray Vowell, and I'm an alcoholic from Beeville, Texas. I want to thank you for the introduction. He was put on notice that he could say anything he wanted to, he just couldn't mention preachers. And I told him it really did not matter to me how I was introduced, because to me, it's a privilege to be introduced after having had to be explained for so many years. You got a problem? I'm glad it's one of sound, because if there's anybody here that can't see me, they're in trouble. I personally didn't think that was a... I can't hear me now. You turned it off. Give me a fair shot, Max. I want at least equal opportunity, you know. First of all, let me say this, that in the outset, that I am a Baptist preacher, and I don't mind being introduced as a Baptist preacher. I'm no more ashamed of being a Baptist preacher than I am of being an alcoholic. We were recently invited to the border conference to speak down in Del Rio, Texas, and I have 3 suits, and this is the other one. I have a white one for marrying people, and a black one for burying people, and a brown one for what I haven't decided to do yet. We drove all day to get down to Del Rio, and I had on my black suit. And Del Rio conference is like this one. It's a beautiful conference right down on the Mexican border. And it's very, very informal, and I didn't have time to change. And I walked into the meeting room and just got there just before the meeting, and some guy standing there looked at me, and he said, "What are you, some kind of preacher?" And I said, "Yes, sir, I am." And he looked at it and he said, "What kind of Baptist?" And I said, "Yes, sir, I am." And he said, "You can't be a Baptist preacher and be an alcoholic." And I said, "That's true, but you can be an alcoholic and be a Baptist preacher." So, you can be an alcoholic and be anything you want to if you do it in the proper order. So I didn't come today to preach. I came to share with you as one alcoholic to many, many. And Faye, look around. The room's full. My wife been worried all morning because people were leaving the motel. She said she has been expecting for 9 years that I'd be invited to speak. Nobody'd show up. And I have too. I want to say one thing. I want to thank the committee for inviting us. We've had a beautiful time here. We love Eureka Springs. We love this part of Arkansas. But I do have a resentment, and the big book says that resentments grow into anxieties, and anxieties grow into pressure, and I cannot let them build up, and I have one. I am the only practicing Razorback fan in Beeville, Texas. And always, up until this year, I've had to hide every Saturday afternoon to watch television. I had decided this year, since we were coming to Arkansas, that I would come out of the closet, and my one desire, other than sharing with you, was to get a hog hat. I haven't got one. I have not found one. I have my red suspenders that I would trade. I would trade my red suspenders for a hog hat on one condition: that I get to mail you the suspenders after I get back to Texas. I hope that I'm not going to have to be in the closet another year. We always love to attend AA conventions and meetings, and it's just a real privilege for us to get to come and to share with you what the program has done in our lives. Now, let me explain one thing. I have no intention of going into any type of drunkalogue this morning for several reasons. First of all, my wife's here. And the second reason is I don't remember very much of it. The third reason is that when I first came into the program, I heard one of the ladies say yesterday morning she was not a circuit speaker and never had a desire to be. I can't say that. I'm not a circuit speaker, but I used to have a terrible desire to be. When I came into the program back in 1971, I found very early that the eardrum and the jawbone will not work at the same time. And that if you talk enough, you don't have to listen. And I really was not too interested in anything that this program had to say, because you were diametrically opposed to everything I believed in. I only had one overwhelming interest in life, and you wanted to remove it. And I could not understand this. I used to tell my wife, but when I first came into the program, I really became a circuit speaker in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, and I went everywhere to keep from staying in one place. And I'm sorry that you did not get to hear me that first 6 months, because you missed a tremendous talk. The only thing wrong with it is none of it was true. What I did is I took every story I ever heard and made me one big one. And I would have had to have been 200 years old to have done half of what I used to say. But what I was very careful about was I never let anybody from my home group, which is Irving, Texas, or anybody from my family ever hear me. And one day, Wilson M., I don't know if any of you know Wilson, he's a RCA out of Louisiana by way of Mesquite, Texas, and Wilson became my publicity manager. And people would call Wilson, and if he didn't want to go, he would refer them to me. So one thing about this program is if you don't have any humility when you come in, if you stay around long enough and you stand up in front of enough alcoholics, you will get some. Wilson invited me to Mesquite to speak one Saturday night, and he invited me in front of my wife. I spent the whole week trying to tell her she didn't want to go. She went anyway. I didn't have sense enough to change what I'd been saying. On the way home that night, she said to me, "Some of the things you said tonight never happened." And I said to her, "A lot of things happened to me when I drank you don't know about." And she said to me, "A lot of things happened to you when you drank that you don't know about." And she said, "The things that you talked about tonight were not any of those." Well, for 9 years, I've been living on a diet of Al-Anon and eggs for breakfast. And it works. You can obviously see that it's not that. And so the next morning, she had a piece of literature on my plate. And I don't remember the piece of literature, but I'll never forget what it said. It said, "The alcoholic who remembers too long and dwells too fondly on past drinking experiences is playing a dangerous game with his life." And so I began to realize that I was not in AA, I was not applying AA, I was just playing AA. And I began to realize that I was playing a game with the only possible hope that I ever had of recovering from the disease of alcoholism. So for that reason, I don't go into a drunkalogue, but let me tell you the main reason. The main reason is that it's no longer necessary for me to convince you that I'm a bigger drunk than you are. There are people here who drank more than I did, I'm sure. There are probably people here who did not drink as much as I did. Neither of those facts is important. It's only important for me to know and accept that I cannot drink alcohol successfully. And I have done this. Today, and for a succession of days that will soon be 9 years, on the July the 20th of 1980. So what I'd like to do this morning is I'd like to talk to you for a little while about the 12 suggested steps of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous as we have tried to put them into practice in our lives. I say we because we have a family disease at our house. We shared the disease and we are sharing in the recovery. True, Faye was sicker than I was. But with my help, she's almost up to the stage of recovery that I'm in. Now, you don't believe that, I can tell. Let me explain to you. I can prove it beyond a shadow of a doubt. I obviously have a weight problem. I have had for many, many years. One time I said to Faye, honey, will you go to Weight Watchers for me? And she went. She lost 25 pounds, and I gained 30. And I said, honey, you're going to have to quit Weight Watchers. I can't stand it anymore. And she quit. So you see, it is a family disease, and we have suffered together, so we are attempting to recover together. So I'd like to talk about the 12 suggested steps of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, I call them suggested steps in keeping with what the Big Book and the 12 and 12 says about them. And the reason the early founders in the program called them suggested steps is they knew that an alcoholic, if you tell them they cannot do something, they will immediately set out to prove to you they can and will. So they said the 12 suggested steps. These are the steps we took. I grew up in a little town in South Georgia called LaGrange, which is just north of Fort Benning. Fort Benning is the home of the Army Paratrooper School. And they used to tell a story there about the group of paratroopers going through school that were fixing to make their first jump. And the officer was explaining to them the nature, the nomenclature of the parachute, and he said to them, this is the backpack, this is the chest pack, this is the shoulder harness, this is the ripcord, and attached to the ripcord is the suggested D-ring. Now, when you jump out of the airplane, we suggest you pull it. You don't have to if you don't want to, but the fall is your responsibility. And I say to you this morning in all sincerity from the bottom of my heart that the 12 steps of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous are suggested. You do not have to take them if you do not want to, but the fall is your responsibility. So let me begin. Let me begin by saying that everything that we are, that everything that we have, everything that we have accomplished is as a direct result of the 12 suggested steps of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. Step 1 says that we admitted we were powerless over alcohol and our lives had become unmanageable. This is a very, very simple thing to say. And yet, I don't know of anything that causes alcoholics more problems. The hardest thing in the world to do is to get an alcoholic to admit that they're powerless over anything. Have you ever seen a poor drunk? Have you ever seen a helpless drunk? Did you ever meet a poor man in a bar? I never did. I never met a ditch digger in a bar. They had either just pulled off a big deal or they were on their way to pull off a big deal, and they'd borrow $10 until they got it pulled, you know. But I never met a poor one. I have seen women come into the program of Alcoholics Anonymous without their children, without their husband, without a job, without a place to live, and you suggest to them that they're powerless over anything, and they get hostile. I have seen men come into the program of Alcoholics Anonymous barefooted with their backsides hanging out. I used to say ass, but I can't say that anymore. Because in keeping with my wife's going to give me fits. I'll tell you what, from here to McAllister, Oklahoma, I'm going to catch you for that one. But it was worth it. You see, what she doesn't know is that my sponsor is going to drive me back, and she's going with her sister. I have seen men literally come into the program with their backsides hanging out of their pants, no shirt, no shoes, no job, no nothing. And you suggest to them that they're powerless and they want to fight. They're not powerless, you know, they're misunderstood. People do not understand us. Well, folks, I want to tell you, I want to clear up something for you. If you don't hear another word I say this morning, listen to this. That was never the problem. People do understand us. That was the problem. People really do understand us. You know that? We did not understand ourselves. The two strongest tools that a practicing alcoholic uses is rationalization and justification. As long as I can blame what I do on you, or on this, or on a place, then there's no hope. I'll give you an example of this. I was sitting in an AA group in Arlington, Texas, one Sunday morning waiting for the meeting to start. Just me and the man that was chairing the meeting, and the telephone rang. And he motioned for me to pick up the extension, and there was a lady very obviously in need of help on the other end. And she said to him, "I'm drunk." And he said, "Well, I'm sorry to hear that." And she said, "Well, I want to tell you why I'm drunk." Well, he said, "Okay." And she said, "It's the peanut butter." And he said, "You mean you're drunk on peanut butter?" And she said, "You don't understand. We don't have any peanut butter. My husband came home and he raised Cain about it, and I went down to the 7-Eleven store. I bought me 12 beers and I drank all of them." And he said, "Well, lady, wouldn't it have been simpler to have bought a jar of peanut butter?" And she said, "The heck with him. I don't care if he never gets any more peanut butter." You see, now we can laugh about that this morning, but now listen to me. I wonder how long that poor lady had to sit there and wait for that man to raise Cain about something so she could go to the 7-Eleven store. How many of you in this room who are alcoholic have never deliberately started a fight at home so you could slam the door and walk out feeling perfectly justified in heading to the liquor store? Rationalization and justification, those are the most important tools in the life of a practicing alcoholic, and if you rob him of those, or her. Let me say something, ladies. I speak in the male vernacular because I'm afraid of women. I am terrified of alcoholic women. I love you very dearly, and I share with you my experience, strength, and hope, but I'm afraid of you. I know that if I ever got involved with one of you, you'd get drunk and you'd tell things that my ego would not let me live with. I just know you would. You see, my sponsor told me one time, my sponsor told me something, and you'd think a 46-year-old man would have learned this by himself. But he said, the minute you get involved with a woman, and the minute you do what you already intended to do that you've been lying about and saying you didn't want to, you turn your life completely over to her. She has complete control, and you know, that just about cut me off right there. Because I never want anybody to have control of my life. I'll tell you another thing about women in AA. When I first came into AA, I developed resentments about what people would say. And every woman alcoholic I ever heard speak would start off this way. My daddy wanted a boy when I was born. And so I was treated wrong. I could not identify with that. I was born during the Depression, and my daddy wanted a mule. And by the time I was 18 years old, he thought he had got what he wanted. We admitted we were powerless over alcohol and that our lives had become unmanageable. And then we come to step 2. And step 2 says that we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Well, now you've got another problem when you deal with alcoholics. You know, when you start talking about sanity, I never had much problem with this. I knew that I was not right. I can remember going to great lengths to cover up my insanity. I can remember saying to Faye, you know, honey, don't tell them I'm drunk. You know, tell them anything, but don't tell them I'm drunk. And she'd say, well, how will I explain to them you being out in the backyard naked? And I would say, you know, I'd say, well, tell them it's an old war wound or it's nerves. You know, anything, but don't tell them I'm drunk. But then, you know, when I came into the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I thank God, and if using the term God offends you, you're in trouble this morning. Because I unashamedly call my higher power God. Because I have an understanding of God that I never had in all those years before AA. And as I sat around the group, I love the analogy that says that we came to, and then we came to believe. Because I came to this program bringing absolutely nothing but a destitute wreck, spiritually, physically, and morally bankrupt, what nobody else wanted. Not even my family. Nobody wanted me. And I came to this program, and people like you allowed me to stay. They allowed me to say things that they knew were ridiculous. They allowed me to speak in closed discussion meetings when I had absolutely nothing to say. They allowed me to chair programs when I had no business even being in their midst. They allowed me to attend their programs and to absorb what they had when I had done absolutely nothing to deserve it. And one day I came to. After about 6 or 8 months, I was sitting in the group one day, and I suddenly came to. And I realized, here's old Curly over here, and I used to hate him. Curly had 27 years of sobriety, and he bragged about it. And he laughed, and he smiled, and I hated that. You know, nobody's happy all the time. I still don't think anybody's happy all the time, you know. If they are, I'm working on it. I'm happy 99% of the time, but 1% of the time I reserve to be miserable. Because if you're never miserable, how do you know when you're happy? People who smile all the time, how do they know what they're smiling about? If you never had anything bad, how would you know what's good? I heard a guy one time who'd been married about 4 months tell his wife, said, honey, you're the best there is. Now, boy, you're in trouble. One of these days, she's going to figure out where is he comparing. When I counsel people on marriage, I always tell them 3 things. I always say to them, when your wife has cramps, never tell her you know how she feels. Never ever tell your wife that she's the best there is, because she wants to know how you know. And the third thing is that anybody in the whole world that ever tells you that marriage is a 50-50 proposition is lying to you, and you run. Where did we ever get that idea that marriage is 50-50? My Lord, at the best it's 90-10. Now, you know, some days, now wait a minute, some days you get 90 and she gets 10. Some days she gets 90 and you get 10. But you stop and think about it a minute. If you know anything at all about the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, you know there's no such thing as 50-50 anything. That means that everybody gets their way all the time. And that won't work. That won't work. So one day I was sitting there in the Irving group, and I came to, and I realized there's old Curly, and by golly, he's got something I don't have. I remember Nick. We buried Nick last month, and I used to resent Nick so much. I preached his funeral, and I came to love him very dearly, but Nick used to say, oh, every time he'd get up behind that podium, he'd say, I woke up on the shores of Lake Dallas, looking down the golden pathway to Alcoholics Anonymous. And I used to say, that sorry son of a gun, he woke up with the sun in his eyes, he had a hangover, and I know how he felt, and it had nothing to do with nothing golden. We had another man in our group named Joe W. Joe W. almost died with cirrhosis of the liver. They gave him something like 40 pints of blood. And I got so sick of hearing about Joe's liver. Every time I'd go to a meeting, Joe would get up and talk about his liver, you know, and I'd say, boy, if I hear one more thing about Joe W.'s liver, I'm going to puke. And one night I got up behind the podium, you know, and I said, I'm so sick of the golden pathway to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I am full up to my gullet with Joe's liver. And they just sat there, you know, and then after it was over, Ollie M. came up to me and he said, you know, we're not too damn fond of that piano story you tell us. But then I came to, and I began to realize, I came to believe. They allowed me to talk. They allowed Nick to talk. They allowed Joe W. to talk. They allowed Curly to talk. And whatever was necessary for them to say, to get rid of this inside of them, that they might come to believe in a higher power, they allowed it. And one day I came to believe that there must be a higher power. I had tried every earthly means of sobriety. I had been to the churches. I had been to the doctors. I had been to the psychiatrists. I had been to the faith healers. Oh, listen, I remember a good friend of mine telling me about his mother taking him to a psychiatrist. And the psychiatrist said to him, I'm going to give you some pills. And if you'll take these pills, when you drink, you'll get sick. And he said, Doctor, I already get sick when I drink. And the doctor said, you mean you know you're going to get sick and you drink anyway? And he said, yes, sir. And the doctor said, oh, I don't understand that. And he said, I don't either, doctor. And he charged him $45. And he left. You know, so I had tried all of these things. My wife is a nurse. She's an RN, and she had tried everything. You know, she had literally tried everything, and my family had tried everything. And yet I continued to do these things that I knew was wrong. I was not crazy. I might have been insane, but I wasn't crazy. I never met a dumb, crazy alcoholic. You cannot survive in that world out there, folks, practicing without being pretty smart. Do you know, I really believe that it takes more for a man like me to raise $5 a day to buy a bottle of whiskey and 2 packs of cigarettes than it would for one of the Rockefellers to make $1 million before lunch. Because he probably knows where he's going to get his, and it'd probably take me 5 people to get mine. And so I came to believe by looking around at people like you that somehow you must have found something that I don't know about. I have tried everything that I know to try. I've tried everything that I am physically capable of trying. And yet you have found a way to stay sober. And so step 3 says we made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. You know, alcoholics make such a booger out of this. They really do. You know, I grew up, as I said, in South Georgia. I grew up in hard-shell Baptist country. You know, I used to think all alcoholics were Baptists. Boy, when I first came in the program, you know, everywhere I go, but I grew up in a Baptist home. You ever meet an alcoholic grew up in a home that was sorry as the devil? Everyone I ever met comes from a good Christian home. Somewhere out there, there must be a home that wasn't Christian that had an alcoholic in it, but I never met. Anyway, I really thought, you know, that all alcoholics were Baptists, because everybody said, I used to be a Baptist. You know, I don't believe that. About 90%. I grew up believing in a God. George Jones and Tammy Wynette had a song about 2 years ago that expressed exactly how I felt about God. God's going to get you for that. Folks, if God were going to get you for that, He'd already got you. You all deserve to be God. You know, I used to walk down them red clay roads. You know, I lived about 3 miles from the church. And I had to walk. We didn't have no, you know, the mules had to rest on Sunday, and we didn't have no car. And I'd walk down there, and I thought every bush was going to burst into flame. Oh, they talk about the unpardonable sin, you know, and I didn't know what it was. But I knew one thing. I either had committed it or I was going to as soon as I was old enough. You see, because I'd already done everything I was old enough to do, and I was going to do the rest of it as soon as I could get out of Daddy's sight. You know, I understand today that, you know, that the unpardonable sin is blaspheming the Holy Spirit of God, and I would not do that. But nobody ever told me that as a child, and so I grew up believing that God was somebody you hide from. And boy, alcoholics believe that too. I never met a practicing alcoholic yet that wasn't trying to hide from God. You didn't do that? Why did you do most of your drinking at night? Alcoholics think God can't see in the dark. Did you know that? I used to believe that. I thought God couldn't see in my garage, so I wouldn't drink in the house. Well, I mean, let's look at it now. I would get up in the morning and I'd say, Lord, take care of my wife and kids, and I wanted them in the house where He could. But don't come out in the garage where I am, because I'm not too well out here. made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God. Do you know, every time I think of that and read that statement, I get a picture of an alcoholic taking his life and wrapping it in foil and putting a ribbon on it and laying it out on the front lawn and saying, God, here it is. God don't want it. Do you know what step 3 simply means? I studied this till I was raw in the head. You know what that means, huh? You understand? You understand what that means, don't you? Some of you don't, and they don't need me trying to explain it to you. And if you do, you know about where I'm coming from. The most terrible thing in the world is a wounded soul. I'm not talking about a wounded person. I'm talking about a bleeding soul. We do have one, you know. I know you tried to hide it all those years, but it's still there. All step 3 really means is this, folks. When you're tired of making a mess out of everything you've done with your life, all God wants you to do is this. Take both hands and put them in your pocket. Take 2 steps back and leave it alone. God will and He can, if sought, take care of our lives. All He wants you to do is be willing. I'll talk about this a little more in a minute, because step 3 goes a little deeper than that for some of us. But step 4 says we made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. Oh boy, I didn't like that one much. You know, I couldn't do that. I would go home and I'd get me a stack of paper and a stack of pencils and 3 packs of cigarettes and a pot of coffee, and I'd put the stereo on and the TV on and run the wife and the kids off in the other part of the house, and I'd sit down and nothing would happen. Sometimes I'd even pick up a pen and nothing would happen. And I'd say, I'll turn my will and my life over to you, put something on the paper. Move me. Move me, you know. And nothing would happen. And so I had a friend that was in prison. I trusted him because he couldn't get out and tell nobody. He was in the federal prison. I go talk to him because he's over there locked up, you know. And he couldn't get out and tell nobody nothing. I went over and I said, hey, I'm having trouble with step 4. And he said, oh, that's simple. I said, it is for you. You're locked up. You can't go nowhere. That's all you got to do. He said, no, I'll tell you how to do step 4. It's real easy. He said, here, you got me a pencil and a piece of paper, and we sat down there in the dining hall of the prison. And he said, draw a line down the center of the paper, and he said, on one side put good, and on the other side put bad. Well, I did that. And he said, now over here, he said, put down, there's nothing wrong with me. And then I understood why I couldn't do step 4. See, I had never had the nerve to write that down. I knew it was true. I just didn't. But, you know, I mean, all alcoholics have a little modesty. So, but, you know, I finally understood. So I wrote down, under the good side, there's nothing wrong with me. He said, now, that's good. He said, now on the other side, you write down, I'm a damn liar. And he said, that's bad. And I did that. And he said, now your inventory started, going home complete. And you know I did. I really did. I went on home and I realized something about an inventory. You know, when an inventory is taken, you take an inventory of what you've got. You know, you don't just inventory those things that you use every day. You inventory everything you've got. You don't inventory the things that are selling. You need to know the things that don't move. When you inventory, you don't just inventory the things that you use every day. You inventory those things back in the closet because you need to know what you got. And that's what step 4 simply is, folks. It's just an opportunity to let you as an alcoholic realize what you got. It's not meant to condemn. It's not meant to denigrate you at all. It's just meant, well, where did I get that word? What does that mean? You write that down. I'll use that next Sunday. You think that's funny? You ought to be in church on Sunday when I slip off into the 5th chapter of the big book. Boy, them folks just clap their hands and say amen, you know, and just preach on, brother, they don't even know what I'm talking about. till we get to the end. And do you know, it always winds up at the same place? Do you know, I'm going to, real quick, I'll sum up what the Bible in the big book and the life of alcoholics, of any alcoholic, it all ends up with one thing. You learn to love God better than anything else. And you learn how to love and serve your brother just like you would yourself. That's what the big book's all about, and that's what the Bible's all about. And you know, they all come together right there at the end. I did my inventory, and then step 5 says that we admitted to God, to ourselves, and another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. And I said, you got to be joking there. Because I've always been taught to believe that God knows everything. Why do I have to tell him? I wrote it. I already know what it says. Why do I have to tell me? And somebody else, you are joking. I can sum it up very simply for you. You admit to God for forgiveness, to yourself for understanding, and another human being for humility. It's that simple. To God for forgiveness, to yourself for understanding, and another human being for humility. And then step 6 says, we were entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. My word, what an order. All and entirely? Are you really ready to have God remove all your defects of character? Really? What are you going to talk about on the way home? You just sacrificed your right to talk about how fat the last speaker was at the convention. I don't want to hear anything at all about this lady's red suit and hat. And I don't care how many of you think this man looks like Santa Claus. By the way, I'm still waiting on the damn pony. 46 years, I'm a continuous optimist. I still believe I'm going to get that pony. I've had enough manure to last 2 lifetimes. If he brought me one, it'd be one of them miniatures over yonder, and I couldn't even sit on it. You will surrender those defects of character as they become unbearable in your life. As you reach the point where you can no longer live with them, you will surrender them. And only then will you surrender them. You did not accumulate those defects of character in one day, and neither will you turn them loose in one day. I remember my worst defect of character is temper. I don't have it anymore, but I used to have a bad one. One day I came home from work, and my son was lowering the wheels on the lawnmower. We had one of those lawnmowers you had to take the nuts off, and move it down in the hole. And he had 3 wheels down and 1 up, and it was froze. And he got a fit-all wrench and a pair of vice grip pliers and a little bitty ball-peen hammer. Well, it wasn't little, it was about that big. And I said, let me try that thing. And I grabbed that thing, and the first thing in vice grip slipped off that nut, and my hand went right in there and just peeled my bark. And I picked that hammer up, and I beat that motor slap off that lawnmower. I looked up, and there stood my wife and daughter in the door of the garage, and she said, well, let's carry on, Mr. Serenity. I said, I'm not going to let this thing upset me, and I threw that hammer through the garage door. And I drove down to Gibson's, and I paid $89 for a new lawnmower. And on the way home, I thought about that $100 it was going to cost for the garage door. And I thought to myself, this is not real smart. This is just not real intelligent. Well, I had a little later, a good friend of mine and I had a fight one night. Not a fight, but we got it crossed hairs there in the AA group. And I did whatever self-respecting alcoholic does. When people don't agree with him, I quit. And I went home and I told my wife, I ain't going back no more. And I was sick. Lord, I was pacing the floor and I was taking J-Seal and throwing up. And boy, I was really tore up. And she said, well, you're not going to get any sleep till you get this straightened out. So 2 o'clock in the morning, I pick up the phone, I call the guy. And he says, hello. And I said, we got to get this straightened out. And he said, who is it? And I said, it's Ray. And he said, well, what do you want? And I said, well, Paul, we got to get this straightened out. And he said, what straightened out? And I said, this fight we're having. And he said, what fight? And I said, are you asleep? And he said, I was. And I made myself a promise right then that I'm not going to ever let you make me mad unless I'm sure you'll be as sick over it as I am. We relinquish those defects of character as they become a problem in our lives. And we do it one step and one day at a time. And then step 7 says that we humbly ask God to remove our defects of character. To remove our shortcomings. And the only thing I can tell you about that is very simply, you do the asking and let God do the removing. The only way it'll work. You have tried your whole lives to do your own removing. Humbly with humility, ask God and let Him do the removing, because, folks, that's the only way it can be done. Then we come to realize that, contrary to what we've been saying all these years, that there were other people involved in our lives. And step 8 says that we made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. The only thing I'll say about this is that when you make that list, you be sure that the people that you most want to leave off, you put them at the top. Because those are the ones that are going to cause you the problem. I had one man in my life that we had cheated one another, and I thought we had everything balanced out. I had stolen from him, and he had cheated me. And I just thought, well, I'm not going to mess with him. Step 9 says that we may direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would harm them or others. Let me tell you about this. I went around and I made amends to people, except this one man, and I just didn't even put him on my list. My AA program began to go sour. I began to take exception to what people were saying in the meetings. I began to fight with my wife and children again. I began to not want to go to meetings anymore. I began to find fault with my employers. I began to find fault with my financial situation. I began to be miserable again. And finally one day my sponsor came to me and he said, there's somebody somewhere that you owe something and you're holding back. I told him about this man. And he said, you've got to go see him. I went home to tell Faye and the children. And they had already decided that this had to be done. And my son was 16 years old, and he said, Daddy, I'll go with you. So we drove back to Georgia from Texas, and we got there, and the man's office was upstairs, and we pulled up in front. My son was driving, and I said, why don't we just go somewhere and spend the night, and I'll go see him tomorrow. And my son said, no, Daddy, you need to go. I went up those stairs, and I sat down with the man, and I told him, I said, I don't think you even know this, but I said, I'm in AA. And he said, I've heard that, Ray. I've heard that you're in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'm really happy for you. I'm really proud that you're getting your life straightened out. And I said, well, there's something I think you ought to know. I said, I stole some money from you in the past. And he reached back in his file drawer, and he pulled out an old ledger, and he had it marked with a paper clip. And he said, is this what you're talking about? And I was shocked. I really didn't think he knew. And he said, yes, that's it. But he said, Ray, don't worry about it. It was quite a bit of money. He said, Ray, don't worry about that. He said, I'm just so happy that you and your family are going to be all right. And he said, I'm willing to just forget the whole thing. And boy, if he was, I sure was. And I went back downstairs, and I jumped in the car, and my son said, Daddy, did you get it straightened out? And I said, yeah. What did he say, Daddy? I said, he said, just forget it. And my son said, Daddy, you can't do that. I said, well, that's all I can do. I don't have any money. It was a while after I came into AA we had any money. It's still a while since I had any. Faye keeps it all. But I want to say in her defense that that's by my choice. I found out years ago that if you don't handle any money, you don't have to be responsible when there's not enough to go around. I went back up those steps, and I told that man, I said, I don't know how. I don't know how. I'm going to pay this. And he said, any way you want to. I came back down, my son and I got in the car. We got back to Jackson, Mississippi. My son pulled off the freeway. I said, why are we stopping here? And he said, Daddy, there's a man here you owe some money to, too. I said, but I don't have any money. He said, I got a check. Mama gave me a check. She said, if you did what was right in Georgia, we would to stop and pay this man here. And if you didn't, it wouldn't make any difference. We came on home. We began to go back to AA, and things were getting pretty good, except for one thing. I was playing AA again. And I heard a man say in the program one night, he said, if you don't have AA at home, you don't have AA. He said, if you don't have AA on your job, you don't have that. Excuse me. Get ready on the tape. I preached in a meeting not long ago, and there was such a big crowd there that they had people in another room, and they didn't have TV, but they just had sound. And I blowed my nose, and the people in the other room said, "You just don't know how that sounds. You can't see you," and you go. This man said, "If you don't have AA on your job, you don't have it." It's easy, folks, for us to attend meetings like this and to sit and be sanctimonious and feel holier than thou in the presence of people who understand us. But the real test of your AA program is when you go out that door Monday morning and you meet those earth people out there on the street, can you give them the freedom that you're demanding? Can you share with them the life that you are professing to share in here? That's the real test of your AA program. And I realized that I had not done this. And so I went home and I sat down, and Faye and the kids had already decided that we were going to do it. We began to put AA into work in our home. Step 10 says that we continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, we promptly admitted it. And people said, well, why do we need to continue to take this inventory? Let me explain this to you. AA's, the life of an alcoholic is something like a manure pile. And when a weed seed falls on a manure pile, if you don't pull it out pretty quick, it'll grow into a full-blown weed. Folks, those defects of character that fall on your life every day, you need to get them out every day because they become trees real fast. Step 11 says we sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God, praying only for knowledge of His will for our lives and the power to carry that out. And folks, I'm going to tell you this. If you've been in the program over a year and you don't have a daily contact with God, you need to go back to step 1 and get on your program. I don't know how people survive without a conscious contact with God. Step 12 says, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we sought to carry the message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. And folks, there's the secret to a happy program of Alcoholics Anonymous, to practice these principles in all our affairs. I'd like to take just a couple of minutes to tell you what it's been like in our lives since we finally began to practice the principles in all our affairs. After about 2 years in the program, I began to sour. I went to my sponsor, and I said, there's something wrong. I'm not getting this program. And he said, you have become a celebrity. You're not in AA, you're just around it. And he said, I would advise you to just shut up and start listening. And for a year, for a solid year, I went to AA 12, 13 times a week. I thank God I came into AA in the Dallas Metroplex, and they have meetings every day, 2 or 3 a day. And I went and I began to read the big book. I began to study the steps. I began to listen to what other people had to say. I began to believe that this program was real. After about 2 more years, I went to my sponsor one day and I said to him, everybody in the whole program is happy but me. I look at people that came in since I did, and they're laughing and they're joking and they're happy and they're improving, and nothing's happening to me. And I want to know why. And he said to me, maybe you're just one of those people that good things never happen to. You see, I got the meanest sponsor that ever lived. I love him like a daddy and hate him. But he's never lied to me. And he said to me, Ray, how are things at home? And I said, well, they're great. Where do you sleep? And I said, I sleep in the king-size bed with my wife. He said, huh. How are the children, Ray? I said, oh, they're great. I said, there's so many kids hang around our house now, sometimes I have to go to the service station to use the restroom. He said, huh. How are things at work, Ray? And I said, well, you know, I've been promoted. I'm head of the department now. He said, huh. How did you get down here today, Ray? And I said, in my new car. He said, huh. He said, Ray, I hope you stay in AA long enough till something good happens to you. I called him a dirty name. And I went down to a little park in Irving, Texas, and I guess the people really did think I was crazy because I sat there under a pecan tree and I cried for about 2 hours because I realized how blind I really was. And I began to think back on the things in my life since I had come into AA, and I remembered being invited to a voice recital, and I went with my wife, and it was our daughter. She was 16 years old, and it was a private recital, and she sang in 5 languages. And I didn't even know she could sing. I'd never heard her sing. I remembered back that we had a son who was in the Air Force in Germany. He was a radio operator, and he used to call me on the Mars network on the radio, and everybody from Texas to Germany could hear us. Everybody that listened in could hear us. And that boy never hung up the telephone without saying to me, Daddy, Daddy, I love you. And I thought, you know, you could go out on the streets of Eureka Springs, you could go to Little Rock, and you could walk up and down the streets, and you could ask people, how long has it been since a 22-year-old son said to you, Daddy, I love you? And folks, you'd have to look real hard to find anybody. I remembered going to Texas Stadium where the Cowboys played when our son graduated from high school. And I looked around and all these thousands of people in this stadium, and I thought to myself, these people expected to be here, and it's a privilege for me because I was invited. I had no right to be there. I was invited to be there. Then the next year our daughter graduated, and I was invited down on the front row. And I was proud. Oh, I was proud. And then I remembered a letter I had. I had the sweetest mother-in-law that ever lived. You hear a lot of people joke about their mother-in-laws. You never hear me joke about mine. She was the one lady that understood me when nobody else did. She didn't know what an alcoholic was. She probably never had seen one. But she used to tell them, you leave Ray alone. He's going to be all right. Ray's not like he is because he wants to be. There's something wrong. Right after I came into AA, we had a letter from her, and she had cancer. She was dying. I still have the letter she wrote, and she said, Ray, they're giving me cobalt treatments. And she said, I'm not afraid to die. But she said, I'm terrified when they put me in that room by myself. And they give me the cobalt. And she said, but I found a way to overcome my fear. She said, Ray, I spend my time in that room praying for you and your problem. And I was so ashamed because I was in Texas feeling sorry for myself because I couldn't drink anymore. And she was up there dying praying for me and my problem. And I went to see her. I went to see her that Christmas, and she told me, she said, Ray, I don't understand all the things that's happened in your life. And she said, I've never condemned you. But she said, I want you to remember one thing, that God has a purpose for you. I don't know what it is, but God has spared you from all this trouble for some reason. I went back home, and I thought about that a lot, and I decided I'd try to go back to church. I didn't like church much. Church has never been very kind to me. Churches, as a general rule, are not kind to alcoholics because they don't smell good, and they don't do right, they don't sing good, they don't follow orders. Well, I'm a pastor now, I can understand that better. I tried to go back to church, and I began trying to make a deal with God. And I said, God, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll become a Sunday school director. And I tried it, and it didn't work. They wouldn't do what I told them. And I said, well, God, maybe I'll just be on the finance committee. And they wouldn't elect me to that. I was sitting in my home one Sunday afternoon, and I don't think I've ever been any more miserable in my whole life. I was sitting on the side of the bed, and I had the big book of AA on one hand, and I had my Bible in the other hand. And I kept looking for an answer. And I said, God, there must be something that I'm missing. I love AA. I love the church. But somewhere in between, I'm lost. I just do not have the answer. I looked down at the big book, and I looked straight at the third step. And it says we made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. And I suddenly realized that God wanted the whole thing. God doesn't want part of anything. He wanted the whole thing. I looked in my Bible, and it was open to the 9th chapter of the book of Acts. I'm not going to preach to you, but this is the account of Paul's conversion on the road to Damascus. When God had taken the worst man that had ever lived in his day and had made something beautiful and useful out of him. And I said, God, surely not that. Surely not that. And I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt. I went into the den where Faye was sitting, and I said, Faye, God has called me to preach. And she said, what and to who? And I didn't even get upset because I could understand her feelings. I had come up with some pretty wild ideas before. I said, Faye, I don't know how we're going to do this, but I've got to prepare. I don't think being an alcoholic prepares you to be a preacher any more than having your appendix out prepares you to be a surgeon. I said, Faye, I'm going to put our house up for sale. I put it up for sale on Monday at 11 o'clock. We sold it for cash at noon with all our furniture. We went from a 3-car family to a 1-Dotson family, and we left. 14 days later, we went to South Texas Children's Home in Pettis, Texas. Faye was on the staff as a nurse, and I began to study for ministry. The church where we are now called us as pastor. First church we had 11 members, and I thought that they didn't get their money's worth. Paid me $30 a week, and I had to drive 50 miles each way over there. The church where we are now called us as pastor. I have to tell you about this, and then I'll close. The first man I met in Beeville was an alcoholic. And he said to me, what do you do? And I said, I'm studying, I'm trying to be a preacher. And he said, I want you to meet my brother-in-law, who's pastor of a church here. I met the man, and they began seeking me to come there, and I felt like the church was too big. I just really did not feel qualified. I still do not. They called me as pastor, and I wouldn't go. They called me again, and I gave them the name of somebody else. I was doing God's work again. I gave them a pastor. I was in Kentucky at my father-in-law's house, and I sat up in the middle of the night, about 2 o'clock. And Faye said, what's the matter? And I said, Faye, there's something bad wrong. I said, George Merriman is going to Beeville, Texas, to Calvary Baptist Church, and that's my church, and he's got no business being there. I called George that morning, and he said, Ray, I already know that. He said, I went down there. He said, it's your church. They want you. I drove all the way from Kentucky back down there, and I called the man, and I said, if they want me, I'll go. But I want them clearly to understand 2 things. First of all, I'm an alcoholic. I can make no promises and no guarantees because I have none. The church knows what I am. They know who I am. We celebrated my 8th birthday by having a meeting in the church on Sunday night. The church was packed. Oh, I don't know how many people were there, but they were half AA and half Baptist. There was a Catholic priest. But let me tell you something. You couldn't tell them apart. When the service was over, I walked out that front door and I could not help crying because I looked and there those people were. The alcoholics were hugging the Baptists and the Baptists were hugging the alcoholics. And they were all there to celebrate my birthday. I can call the church, and we've got a big church now, folks. It's almost tripled in size since we've been there. We built a new building, a new Sunday school, a new auditorium, a new fellowship hall, and mostly because I don't have sense enough to know that I can't do a lot of the things that we're doing. I really, we have just, God has just really let. I want you to know this, that I am what I am by virtue of what you gave me in this program. This program prepared me for the ministry in ways that the seminary never taught me. This program prepared me to be a speaker. I had never spoke before people before I came into AA. This program prepared me with an understanding for people. This program, through your sharing, has given me the ability to hear what people say. But most of all, this program has given me first sobriety, and secondly, an understanding of God. And it all boils down to two very simple things. After all the talking's over, and all the fellowship is ended, it comes down to two very simple facts. I know which drink makes me drunk, the first one. And I know who, with God's help, has the choice over whether or not I take it, and that's me. Thank you for letting us go.